The birthday gift was wrapped in silver paper, tied with a white ribbon, and slid across the dinner table like evidence. My sister Sloane smiled when she pushed it toward me. That particular smile she'd been perfecting since we were children, the one that looked warm from a distance and felt like a blade up close. "I think you'll find this enlightening," she said. I looked at the box. Then I looked at my mother, Patrice, who had suddenly found something deeply interesting to study in the bottom of her wineglass. My father, Stuart, set his fork down and said nothing. At the end of the table, my grandmother Harriet sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching me with eyes that were neither surprised nor afraid. I unwrapped the paper carefully. Inside was a DNA testing kit. The refrigerator hummed. A log shifted in the fireplace. Outside, March rain tapped against the windows of the house I grew up in. "Maybe," Sloane said softly, leaning forward just slightly, "this will finally explain why you've always felt like you don't belong here." I set the box down on the table. I looked at my sister, and I said the only thing that was true in that moment. "Thank you. I'll use it." What Sloane didn't know, what she couldn't have known because she had never thought to ask, was that I had known the truth she was trying to weaponize for 16 years. I had known since I was 19 years old, sitting in a university cafeteria in Seattle while my grandmother Harriet held my hands across a plastic table and told me everything. I had spent every one of those 16 years preparing for exactly this moment. Sloane wanted to hand me a grenade. She didn't realize I had already defused it and built something entirely different with the pieces. My name is Arden Crawford. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. Portland, Oregon has a particular kind of winter. Not the dramatic, heavy snowfall of the mountain towns, but a persistent gray dampness that settles into everything. The streets smell of wet cedar and coffee. The sky stays the color of old pewter for weeks at a time. It is a city that rewards people who know how to be quietly content and punishes those who are waiting for someone else to make them feel significant. I had learned to be quietly content a long time ago. By the time I turned 35, I had built what most people would call a modest life. I worked as a financial analyst at a mid-sized firm in the Pearl District, 3 blocks from the river. I drove a 7-year-old Subaru that I maintained meticulously. I lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment with good light and bookshelves along every available wall. I wore neutral colors, navy, gray, cream, and I did not own a single piece of jewelry that cost more than $40. To my mother, Patrice, this was evidence of failure. To my sister Sloane, it was confirmation of what she had always believed, that I was the lesser version of everything the Crawford name was supposed to represent. To the world outside our family, I was simply unremarkable. A quiet woman at the end of the conference table, a careful voice on a quarterly earnings call, someone whose name you might not remember after a dinner party, but whose absence you would somehow notice the following week without being able to say why. I had cultivated this impression deliberately for 16 years, with the patience of someone who understood that the most powerful position in any room is the one that no one is watching. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you first about the family I grew up in, because you cannot understand what happened in that conference room on a snow-dusted Wednesday morning in January without understanding the house on Hartwell Drive, the Crawford house, 4 bedrooms and a wraparound porch, set back from a quiet street in the West Hills neighborhood where old Portland money had always preferred to live quietly. My grandfather, Leland Crawford, built Crawford Property Group from a single commercial lease in 1971. He was 26 years old, newly married to Harriet, and possessed of a particular quality that the people who knew him in those early years always struggled to describe precisely. It wasn't ambition exactly, though he had that. It wasn't intelligence, though he had that too. It was something more like patience combined with perception. An ability to look at a situation longer than other people were comfortable looking, and to see things in that extended looking that others had already stopped watching for. By the time I was born, Crawford Property Group managed a portfolio of commercial real estate across Oregon and Washington, with assets valued at just over $40 million. The house on Hartwell Drive had been paid off for 2 decades. Leland drove a 10-year-old Ford pickup truck and wore the same style of flannel shirt in 4 different colors. He was not a man who needed people to know what he had. He was a man who needed to know what he had. There is a very significant difference between those 2 things, and it shaped everything that came after. My grandmother Harriet was the kind of woman that people in her generation would have described as formidable if she had been born into a different circumstance, and instead described as gracious because she had the manners to make her formidability easy to overlook. She had silver hair that she wore pinned back simply, a preference for blue and gray, and a habit of sitting very still in social situations while her eyes did a great deal of work. She and Leland had one son, Stuart Crawford, my father. Stuart was, and I say this with the specific tenderness of someone who spent 35 years trying to understand a man she loved and could not reach, a person who had been shaped by pressure into a particular kind of smoothness. He was handsome in a conventional way, careful in his speech, reliable in his routines. He had joined Crawford Property Group at 24 and worked there for over 30 years without ever quite becoming the person his father had hoped he would become. Not because he lacked intelligence, because he lacked Leland's particular willingness to sit with discomfort until it told him something useful. Stuart preferred comfort, and the most comfortable thing Stuart had ever found was Patrice. Patrice Henley had grown up in Salem, the daughter of a hardware store owner and a piano teacher. She was 23 when she met Stuart at a charity gala that she had attended as a guest of a friend, and she understood immediately and precisely what Stuart Crawford represented. I do not say this with cruelty. Patrice was not a calculating villain. She was a young woman from a modest background who had been told since childhood that the right marriage was the right life, and she pursued that belief with the same diligence that other women of her generation pursued graduate degrees. She married Stuart 8 months after they met. She redecorated the house on Hartwell Drive within the first year. She joined the right committees, attended the right events, and learned very quickly that the Crawford name opened doors that her own name never would have. She had Sloane first. Then, 2 years later, she had me. Except, of course, she didn't. I want to be careful here, because the truth of my parentage is not the point of this story, or rather, it is one point among many and not the sharpest one. But you deserve the full picture, so let me give it to you plainly. Before Patrice married Stuart, she had been involved with a man named Owen Hartley. He was a landscape architect from Eugene, thoughtful and quiet in the way that serious creative people sometimes are. Their relationship lasted 2 years and ended badly. Not because either of them was a bad person, but because they were 22 and 24 and neither of them yet knew how to hold something fragile without eventually crushing it. When Patrice discovered she was pregnant 2 months after her engagement to Stuart, the timing was complicated. Stuart knew. Leland knew. They made a decision together, the kind of decision that men of a certain generation and background made with the efficiency of people accustomed to managing problems before they became public. Patrice would have the baby. The baby would be a Crawford. Owen Hartley would not be told. The matter would be closed. It was closed for 19 years. Then Harriet opened it. I was a sophomore at the University of Washington when my grandmother appeared in the doorway of the campus cafeteria on a Tuesday afternoon in October, wearing her gray wool coat and carrying 2 cups of coffee from the shop across the street. I hadn't told anyone she was coming. She hadn't told me. She sat down across from me, pushed one of the coffees toward me, and folded her hands on the table with the deliberate calm of someone who has been rehearsing an opening and decided at the last moment to abandon it. "There is something you need to know," she said, "before someone else decides to tell you in the way that would hurt you most." She told me everything. Owen Hartley, the timing, the decision Stuart and Leland had made, the 19 years of careful silence. She did not apologize on her own behalf because she had not been part of the decision. She had been told after the fact, and she had disagreed with it, and she had spent 19 years waiting for the right moment to correct it. She did apologize on behalf of the family, carefully and specifically, in the way that Harriet did everything, with precision and without excess. And then she said the thing that I have thought about nearly every day since. Your grandfather has watched you from a distance that was not his choice. He loves you in a way he doesn't know how to say to your face, because saying it would require him to admit that the silence was wrong, and he is not yet ready to do that. But I need you to know it anyway. He sees you, Arden. He has always seen you. I sat with that for a long time after she left. Then I made a decision. I was not going to go home and confront Patrice. I was not going to call Stuart and demand an explanation. I was not going to do any of the things that a 19-year-old in pain might reasonably do, things that would make me feel briefly powerful and ultimately leave me exposed, without leverage, without preparation, without the tools I would need for whatever came next. I was going to learn everything I possibly could about money, law, and the management of complicated assets, and I was going to be patient. 16 years is a long time to be patient, but I had a very good teacher. There is a version of my adult life that Patrice and Sloan understood, and there is the version that was actually true. For a long time, those two versions did not resemble each other at all. The version they understood: I had graduated with a finance degree, taken a mid-level analyst position at a company called Meridian Group, and settled into a life of quiet, unremarkable competence. I drove a practical car, lived in a practical apartment, attended family dinners when required, and offered no particular challenge to the order of things. The version that was actually true. After my undergraduate degree, I spent 4 years completing a law degree in the evenings while working full-time at Meridian, estate law primarily, with a secondary focus on corporate structure and asset protection. I told no one in my family. My diploma is in a frame in my home office, behind the door, where no one who visits casually would think to look. Over the following decade, I moved through 3 different financial firms, each one larger and more complex than the last. I wasn't building a resume. I was building a specific kind of knowledge, the kind that lets you look at a $40 million asset portfolio and understand not just what it's worth, but where it's vulnerable, where it's protected, and exactly what it would take to move it from one set of hands to another. My personal savings and investment accounts, by the time of my 35th birthday, totaled just over $1.2 million. I had never mentioned this to anyone in my family. As far as Patrice and Sloan were concerned, I was a woman who drove a 7-year-old car because she had to. But the most important thing I built during those 16 years was not financial. It was something quieter and far more significant. Once a month, on Wednesday mornings, I drove 40 minutes north to the Maple Ridge Residential Care Facility in the West Hills. I arrived at 9:15, which was after the morning medication rounds and before the scheduled activities, when the common rooms were still mostly empty. I brought 2 cups of coffee from the shop on Burnside, black for him, a splash of cream for me, and I walked through the garden path to the corner bench near the Japanese maple, where my grandfather Leland Crawford would already be waiting. He was not lost. He was not confused. He did not shuffle or mumble or stare at the middle distance the way that Patrice and Sloan on their occasional visits seemed to expect and require of him. When they visited, which was not often, Leland performed a version of his age that satisfied their assumptions. He moved slowly. He repeated himself. He occasionally called Sloan by the wrong name, which she always corrected with the particular impatience of someone who considered the inconvenience of caring for an elderly person to be a moral failing on the elderly person's part. On Wednesday mornings, with me, he did none of that. I learned 30 years ago, he told me once, early in our arrangement, that people tell you the truth when they think you're not capable of understanding it. If you'd like to know what people really think of you, let them believe you've lost a few steps. He smiled when he said this. That dry, precise smile that I had inherited and that Sloan had not. We talked for 2 hours every month. About the business, about the market, about the specific vulnerabilities in the Crawford Property Group structure that had developed over the past decade as Stewart had gradually ceded operational decisions to a management team that Sloan had begun to influence in ways that were not formally documented anywhere. He told me about the loans. Sloan had been asking Leland for money since she was 28 years old. First for a real estate investment that she described as a sure thing and that lost 30% of its value within 2 years, then for a kitchen renovation that somehow became a full home remodel, then for a series of increasingly abstract business ventures that existed primarily as PowerPoint presentations and optimism. By the time Leland began telling me about them, the total had reached $340,000. None of it was documented as a loan. All of it had been given in cash or through private transfers, with the understanding, Sloan's understanding, that it was simply a father's gift to his daughter. Leland had a different understanding. I gave her the money, he told me on a cold Wednesday morning in February 2 years before he died, because I wanted to see how far she would go. A person's character is most clearly visible in what they do when they believe there are no consequences. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and looked out at the bare maple branches. She's been meeting with estate lawyers, he said, 3 different firms in the past year, asking questions about what rights a biological child has in the event that a parent's will appears to favor a non-biological dependent. He said the word non-biological with a kind of precise quietness that made it clear he knew exactly what it felt like to hear it applied to someone he loved. She doesn't know that I know, he said. What are you going to do? I asked. He looked at me for a moment with those gray eyes that missed nothing. I already did it, he said. 8 months ago, I rewrote the will. He had not stumbled into loving me because I happened to be in his house. He had made a decision, consciously and with full information when I was a toddler, that I was his granddaughter, not biologically, by choice, and that a choice made with full knowledge and clear eyes meant more than a fact arrived at by accident. I want you to understand something, he said. He set down his coffee. He looked at me directly in the way he rarely did because it was the kind of directness that demanded the same in return. When I leave this world, I am not leaving you what I think you're owed. I am leaving you what I know you can be trusted with. There's a difference. One is a debt. The other is a decision. I felt something shift in my chest. Not the sharp relief of a tension released, but the slower, more complex feeling of something that had been uncertain for a long time becoming solid. Does anyone else know about the new will? I asked. Raymond Whitfield knows. He drew it up. The witnesses are the head nurse here and a private investigator named Dale Foss, who has been documenting Sloane's activities for the past 2 years at my request. He paused. Sloane has managed to access a copy of the original will through means I chose not to prevent. She believes she knows what it says. He let the implication settle. She doesn't know the second one exists, I said. She knows exactly what I want her to know, he said. No more, no less. 3 months before Leland died, on the last Wednesday morning we sat together at the corner bench, he told me about Dale Foss's complete findings. Dale had been thorough in the way that good private investigators are thorough. Not dramatic, not confrontational, simply present and attentive in the places where important things happen when people believe they aren't being watched. The file contained meeting logs from Sloane's consultations with 3 separate estate attorneys, all within the previous 18 months. It contained financial records showing the movement of the $340,000 traced through bank transfers and cash withdrawals. It contained a recording, obtained legally through means I won't detail here, of a phone call between Patrice and Sloane, made approximately 2 months before Leland's death, in which Patrice said, with a clarity that I found both devastating and clarifying, he just needs to sign the amended version before he can't sign anything anymore. And it contained a purchase record. An online order placed from Sloane's home address 6 weeks before my birthday dinner. 1 DNA testing kit. Gift wrapped. Leland looked at me when he told me this. His expression was not triumphant. It was something closer to grief with its edges worn smooth by long familiarity. She bought the test before she knew how to use it, he said. She was waiting for the right moment to cause you the most pain. I want you to know, and I need you to hear this clearly, Arden, that every step she took toward hurting you became a step she took into a trap of her own making. I did not build the trap. I simply stopped filling it in. I thought about the silver wrapping paper, the white ribbon, the way Sloane had smiled when she slid the box across the table. She wanted me to take the test, I said. Yes. She wanted the results to exist as a document. Yes. She had spoken with a lawyer about using a non-biological relationship as grounds to contest a will that appeared to favor a non-biological dependent. He paused. She didn't know the will she'd read was 16 years old and had been superseded. Outside, a crow landed on the far end of the garden wall and regarded us without apparent interest. So when I mailed the test, I said slowly. And when the results came back, the results become part of the record, Leland said. And the record shows that I knew, that I always knew, that my decision was made with complete information. He looked at me. Your sister handed you the final piece of evidence that makes my will uncontestable. She just doesn't know that yet. I looked at my grandfather. This small, precise, quietly extraordinary man sitting on a garden bench in the November cold, who had spent 2 years building a legal structure so airtight that his granddaughter's inheritance could survive any challenge. And I understood something that I had been circling for 16 years without being able to name it. Some people show love loudly, in gestures and declarations and the constant reassurance of spoken words. And some people show love the way that architects show love for a building they design, in the quality of the foundation, in the thought given to every load-bearing wall, in the certainty that what they built will still be standing long after they are gone. Leland Crawford had built something that would still be standing. I'll take care of it, I said. I know, he said. That's why I'm leaving it to you. That was the last real conversation we had. He died in December on a Friday morning in his sleep. The nurse called me first, as he had instructed. I arrived before Patrice and Sloan, and I sat with him for 20 minutes in the quiet of that room, with the winter light coming gray and soft through the curtains. I did not cry then. I cried later, alone in my apartment, for a long time. But in that room, I was simply present with him, the way he had always been present with me, carefully, attentively, without excess. Then I drove home and called Nora Ashby. Nora Ashby was 51 years old and had been practicing estate litigation for 23 years. She had been referred to me by Harriet Crawford, who had met her through a mutual friend several years earlier and had apparently been holding the referral in reserve for exactly this moment. When I called and explained the situation, Nora listened without interrupting for 11 minutes, asked 3 precise questions, and said, "Can you come in tomorrow morning? Bring everything." I brought everything. The DNA results. I had mailed Sloane's gift the morning after my birthday dinner because Leland was right. I needed that document to exist. The results had come back 6 weeks later, arriving on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at my desk. No biological relationship detected with the Crawford family lineage. Suggested match: Hartley family genetic profile. I had looked at the words for a long time. They confirmed nothing I didn't already know, but there is a difference between knowing something and seeing it written in the clean, impersonal language of science. I had allowed myself exactly one evening to feel all of the feelings that came with that difference. Then I had filed the results in a folder marked Estate Documentation and moved on. I brought the photograph, found years earlier in a box in my childhood bedroom, tucked in an envelope at the back of the closet. A young Patrice, holding an infant, standing beside a man I had eventually identified as Owen Hartley. On the back, in Patrice's handwriting, "Forgive me. I had photographed it the night of my birthday dinner and left the original where I found it. I brought 16 years of emails and messages between Leland and me, a correspondence he had instructed me to preserve from our earliest Wednesday mornings, telling me simply, 'Keep these. Someday they'll matter.' I had kept every one. And I brought Dale Foss's contact information, which Leland had given me on our last morning together, along with a sealed letter addressed to Dale and a simple instruction. He'll know when it's time." Nora read through everything for 40 minutes. She took notes in a small leather notebook with a precise, abbreviated shorthand. When she finished, she set down her pen and looked at me over her glasses. "Your grandfather was more thorough than most attorneys I've worked with," she said. "He had 2 years and a very clear idea of what he wanted to accomplish," I said. "The 2-will structure is elegant," she said. "Sloan accessed the original through, I'm guessing, an indiscretion on the part of someone in Whitfield's office, or possibly a private investigator of her own. Either way, she built her entire strategy around a document that was superseded before she ever read it." Nora paused. "That's not bad luck on her part. That's by design." "He wanted her to be confident," I said. "He said a person's character is most visible when they believe there are no consequences." Nora looked at me for a moment. "What do you want out of this, Arden? Not what the will says. What do you want?" I thought about it. "I want to do what he trusted me to do," I said. "I want to manage what he built and make it worth more than it is today. I want Harriet to be comfortable for whatever time she has left, and I want the record to be accurate. Not for my sake, but because accurate records matter. My grandfather knew that. It's why he spent 2 years creating them." "And your family?" "My father is not my enemy. My mother made choices a long time ago that she's been paying for ever since in ways she probably doesn't fully recognize. My sister," I paused. "My sister made choices much more recently that were deliberate and that she understood the weight of. I don't want revenge. But I also don't intend to protect anyone from the consequences of what they chose." Nora nodded slowly. "3 days from now," she said, "Raymond Whitfield is going to call you. He'll tell you that the terms of the will specify a reading to take place 30 days after Leland's death, and that those 30 days expire next Wednesday." "I know." "Be ready." "I've been ready for 16 years, I said. She almost smiled at that. "One more thing," she said. She opened a folder on her desk. "Dale Foss reached out to me yesterday. He said your grandfather left a specific instruction. The file he's been building doesn't transfer to you until you come to him yourself. Leland's words, apparently, were, She'll know when it's time. If she comes to me, she's ready. If she waits for someone to bring it to her, she isn't. I picked up my bag. I'll call him this afternoon. And outside Nora's office building, Portland was doing what Portland does in December. A cold, steady drizzle turning the streets dark and reflective, the lights of the Pearl District glittering in the wet pavement like a second city visible only in fragments. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment before walking to my car. Somewhere across town in the house on Hartwell Drive, Sloane was probably sitting in Leland's study with her laptop open and her confidence intact, planning the life she believed was already hers. She had spent 37 years being the daughter who was seen, the daughter who was present, the daughter who everyone assumed would inherit the Crawford name in every meaningful sense. She had spent 37 years looking past me. I had spent 16 of those years making sure she had every reason to keep doing exactly that. The rain picked up. I pulled my coat tighter and walked to my car, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt something that I had been careful, for many years, not to feel too soon. I felt ready. Leland Crawford was buried on a Saturday in the small cemetery attached to the Presbyterian Church on Westover Road, where he and Harriet had attended services for 40 years. The service was simple, the way he had specified in a document he'd left with Raymond Whitfield. No eulogies longer than 3 minutes. No flowers that couldn't be composted, and a reception afterward at the house on Hartwell Drive with coffee and the particular lemon pound cake that Harriet had been making since 1974. 63 people came to the service. Colleagues from the early years of Crawford Property Group, neighbors from the West Hills, a few men his age who had known him since before any of them had anything worth knowing each other for. They stood in the December cold with their hats in their hands and their breath making small clouds in the gray air, and they looked genuinely bereft in the way that people look when someone dies who was actually, specifically, irreplaceable. I sat in the second pew between Harriet and Stuart. Patrice was on Stuart's other side, composed and correct in black wool. Sloane sat at the end of the row in a coat I recognized as new, her posture the particular uprightness of someone performing grief for an audience. The minister spoke about Leland's steadiness, his patience, his habit of listening longer than other people were comfortable with. I watched Sloane's profile when the minister said that. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. After the burial, walking back across the wet grass toward the waiting cars, Harriet tucked her hand into my arm. She was 80 years old and had been married to Leland for 57 years, and she walked with the same unhurried steadiness she had always had, not leaning on me for support, just choosing to be near me. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. Behind us, I could hear Sloane on her phone, already. The 15 days between Leland's burial and Raymond Whitfield's call were the most instructive 15 days I had ever spent observing my family. I want to describe them carefully, because what happened in those 2 weeks was not dramatic in the way that people expect betrayal to be dramatic. There were no shouting matches, no confrontations, no doors slammed in anger. What happened was quieter than that, and more revealing, and in its own way, far more damning. It was the ordinary behavior of people who believed they had already won, day 3 after the burial. I arrived at the house on Hartwell Drive at 10 in the morning to check on Harriet, who had requested company and was, characteristically, making her own breakfast when I arrived rather than waiting for anyone to make it for her. We sat in the kitchen with coffee and she told me, without particular drama, that Sloane had called Raymond Whitfield the previous afternoon. "She wants to move up the reading," Harriet said. She poured a precise measure of cream into her cup. Raymond told her the timeline is specified in the document itself and cannot be adjusted. She told him the family needed clarity in order to make practical decisions. What did Raymond say? He said the document would provide all necessary clarity on the appointed date. Harriet picked up her cup. "He's known your grandfather for 31 years. He said it very politely. I thought about Raymond Whitfield, whom I had met twice during my grandfather's life. Once at a Crawford Property Group board dinner when I was 27, and once at the Maple Ridge Garden on a Wednesday morning when Leland had asked him to come. Raymond was 70 years old, silver-haired, and possessed of the specific, settled dignity of a man who had spent 3 decades managing other people's most consequential decisions and had learned not to be surprised by anything. When I had sat across from him at the garden table and Leland had introduced what was to be done, Raymond had looked at me for a long moment and then said simply, "Your grandfather speaks very highly of you. I can see why. It was not flattery, it was assessment. I had appreciated the difference." "She won't stop pushing," I said. "No," Harriet agreed. "She won't. That's useful information if you think about it correctly. I did think about it correctly. Sloane's urgency told me she was working on a timeline, that there was something she needed to accomplish before the official reading, something that required the reading to happen on her schedule rather than Leland's, which meant she wasn't as confident as she appeared, which meant there were gaps in her knowledge that she was trying to close before someone else could use them. I filed that away and said nothing. Day 7. Stuart called me. Not Patrice calling on Stuart's behalf, which was the usual mode of family communication. Stuart himself from his cell phone at 7:15 in the morning. Your mother mentioned that Sloane is going to need some of the financial files from the past 2 years, he said. He sounded tired in the particular way of someone who had not slept well in many days. The operational records from the property group. She said she'd coordinate with you directly. Of course, I said. Have her send me a specific list of what she needs and I'll pull the relevant documents. There was a pause. She may just call and ask generally, Stuart said. Then I'll ask her to be specific, I said pleasantly. It'll be easier to make sure she gets exactly what she's looking for. Another pause. Longer this time. Arden, he said, and then stopped. I know, Dad, I said, because I did know. I knew he was standing in whatever room Patrice wasn't in, holding his phone with both hands, trying to say something that had been forming in him for 35 years and still hadn't found a way out. It's okay, I'll handle it. He exhaled slowly. All right, he said. All right. Sloane called that afternoon with a general request for overview documentation on current asset management. I told her warmly that I wanted to make sure she got exactly the right materials and asked her to email me a specific list. She said she'd have her assistant do that. No list ever arrived. I was not surprised. Day 12. This was the day that mattered. This was the day I stood outside a window I hadn't intended to stand outside and heard something that turned the vague, patient preparation of 16 years into something sharp and immediate and necessary. I had come to Hartwell Drive to bring Harriet the lemon pound cake she'd run out of. She'd made one for the reception and hadn't made another since, and I knew she wouldn't ask anyone to get her the ingredients but would be quietly pleased if someone brought the finished product. I had made it from her recipe, which she had written out for me on a piece of note card when I was 17 and which I had kept in my kitchen since. I came in through the side gate as I always did because the front door felt increasingly like a performance space, and I had stopped enjoying performances some time ago. The kitchen light was on. The window above the sink was cracked open slightly, the way Harriet always left it even in cold weather because she believed that a house needed to breathe. I heard Sloane's voice from the study. The door was not fully closed. I was not trying to listen. I want to be honest about that because the story is honest about everything else, and I see no reason to make myself more heroic than I was. I stopped walking because I heard my own name, and when you hear your name in a voice that doesn't know you're present, your feet make the decision to stop before your mind has finished forming the thought. The results are submitted as part of a formal legal challenge. The burden of proof shifts. She has no documented biological relationship. Under Oregon's intestate succession defaults, a non-biological, non-adopted dependent has limited standing to contest a distribution that doesn't include her. Pause. The sound of Sloane shifting in a chair. I understand there's a no contest clause in the version you've seen, but if we can establish that the document itself was executed under conditions that are legally questionable, the witnesses, the timing, whether he had capacity, then the no contest provision is potentially void. Another pause. The DNA documentation exists. I have it. Yes. No. She did it herself. She mailed the kit after the birthday dinner. She handed us the evidence, basically. I stood in the cold garden with the lemon pound cake wrapped in a dish towel, and I felt something settle in my chest, like a stone finding the bottom of a still, deep lake. She was not just hoping to inherit more than the original will provided. She was building a case to remove me from consideration entirely. She had the original will, which she believed was the operative document. She had the DNA results, which she intended to use as evidence of non-biological status. She had a legal theory about contested capacity. And she believed, with the total comfortable confidence of someone who had never been seriously challenged, that she had everything she needed. She had Leland's original will. She did not know about Raymond Whitfield's sealed folder sitting in a fireproof cabinet in a law office downtown, containing a document signed 8 months ago in the presence of 2 unimpeachable witnesses. She had the DNA results. She did not know that Leland had spent the last 8 months of his life building a documented record of his knowledge, his reasoning, and his deliberate, informed choice. She had a legal theory about capacity. She had not yet met Nora Ashby. I stood there for another moment. Then I walked to the kitchen door, knocked twice, as I always did, and went inside to give Harriet her cake. Harriet looked at my face when I came in, that precise, unhurried assessment she had been performing my whole life. And she said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Sit down. I'll make tea. And when we were both sitting, she looked at me across the kitchen table. "You heard something," she said. "Yes. Are you ready?" I thought about it honestly, the way Leland had taught me to think about things honestly. "I've been ready," I said. "I just needed to know what I was ready for." Harriet wrapped both hands around her mug. "Raymond Whitfield gave me a number to give you. He said to tell you, whenever she's ready, not before." She slid a small piece of paper across the table. I already had Raymond's number, but I understood what Harriet was actually giving me. Not contact information, but permission, confirmation, the signal from the last person whose signal I had been waiting for. I picked up the paper and put it in my pocket. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me," Harriet said. She took a slice of the pound cake and settled back in her chair with the satisfaction of someone who has been waiting a very long time to see a particular thing happen and can now see it beginning to move. "Thank your grandfather. He thought of everything." That evening, I called Dale Foss. I had been carrying his number for 3 months, folded in the same card holder where I kept my license and my one credit card. Leland's instruction had been clear. Come to him yourself when you know the time is right. I had not rushed it. I had waited until I understood exactly what I was walking into and exactly what I needed to come out with. Dale Foss answered on the second ring. He had a voice like weathered wood, not unfriendly, just seasoned and specific. "Ms. Crawford," he said. Not a question. "You were expecting me," I said. "Your grandfather said you'd call when the time was right." A brief pause. "I've been looking forward to it." We met the following morning in his office on the 4th floor of a building in Northwest Portland, a plain room with 2 chairs, a desk, a window overlooking the street, and a very large number of carefully organized files. Dale Foss was 60 years old, compact and unhurried, with the specific quality of stillness that comes from years of being paid to notice things without being noticed yourself. He set a black hard drive and a box of printed documentation on the desk between us. "Your grandfather asked me to say something before I give you this," he said. I nodded. He said, "Tell her this isn't a weapon, it's a record. There's a difference. A weapon is for hurting people. A record is for telling the truth. She'll know which one to use it for." I looked at the box. "He was right," I said. "I know." Dale pushed it across the desk. I spent the following 4 days with Nora Ashby, going through everything. The documentation Dale had assembled was comprehensive in the way that 2 years of careful, professional attention produces comprehensiveness. Not dramatic, not excessive, simply complete. Every meeting Sloan had taken with the state attorneys was logged. Dates, locations, firms, the names of the specific lawyers she had consulted. Every financial transfer connected to the $340,000 was traced and documented with bank records attached. The phone recording of Patrice and Sloan's conversation was transcribed and time-stamped. The purchase record for the DNA testing kit was printed with the order number, the delivery address, Sloan's home, and the date, 6 weeks before my birthday dinner. Nora read through it all with her characteristic stillness. "The phone recording is admissible in Oregon under the one-party consent rule," she said, "provided it was obtained through Dale's methodology, which is documented here." She flipped a page. "The financial records are clean. The meeting logs are corroborated by billing records from 2 of the 3 firms." She set down the last page. "This is not a preponderance of evidence. This is an overwhelming preponderance of evidence." "Leland was thorough," I said. "Leland was extraordinary," Nora said with the specific respect of one professional recognizing the work of another. "He didn't just build a case. He built a case that accounts for every countermove. Every argument Sloan's attorney could make has been anticipated and foreclosed." She paused. The second will is the keystone. Everything else supports it, but the will itself is airtight. 2 independent witnesses, both with documented relationships that are above reproach. Signed 8 months before his death, during a period when his medical records show full cognitive capacity. She looked at me. Any challenge on the grounds of diminished capacity will fail. The records at Maple Ridge are complete. His physician's documentation is unambiguous. She was going to argue he wasn't competent when he signed. I said, she was going to try. She won't succeed. Nora closed the folder. The reading is Wednesday. Are you ready? Yes, I said. Wear something you feel like yourself in, Nora said. This surprised me slightly, and she saw that. I've been doing this for 23 years, she said. The way you walk into that room matters, not because of optics, because of how you feel in your own body when the moment comes. Wear something that makes you feel like exactly who you are. I thought about what that meant. I know what to wear, I said. I want to stop here for a moment and explain what Raymond Whitfield told me when I called him the day after my conversation with Harriet, because this piece of the story is the one that I have turned over most often in the years since, and the one that still fills me with the specific, complicated mixture of admiration and grief that I associate most closely with my grandfather. Leland had known from fairly early in the process that Sloane had found a way to access the original will. He had known because Dale Foss had told him, and Dale Foss had known because the investigator Sloane hired, a less careful professional than Dale, had made an inquiry through a channel that Dale had flagged 2 years earlier as one worth monitoring. Leland had not stopped her from reading it. He had let her read every word of the original document, drawn up 16 years ago, which distributed the Crawford estate in the way that most people would have expected. A primary share to Stuart and Patrice, a secondary share divided between Sloane and me, with provisions for Harriet's care. He had let Sloane read it and take notes from it and build an entire legal and financial strategy around it. And then, 8 months before he died, he had sat down with Raymond Whitfield and executed a completely different document that superseded it in every particular. Why didn't he just update the original? I asked Raymond when he explained this to me. Raymond was quiet for a moment. He said, Raymond replied carefully, that a person who is willing to manipulate a dying man for financial gain will not stop doing so unless they are stopped completely, not slowed down, not redirected, stopped. Another pause. He wanted Sloane to believe, completely and without reservation, that she had already won. He said that the most dangerous version of Sloane was the one who suspected she might lose. The version of Sloane who was certain she had won would be, Raymond searched for the word, legible. I sat with that for a long time after I hung up. He had let her believe she had won because a person who believes they have won stops being careful. They stop covering their tracks. They make the calls they shouldn't make, sign the things they shouldn't sign, say out loud the things that should never be said out loud. And then the record shows exactly who they are. I simply stopped filling in the trap, he had said. I understood now fully what he had meant. The night before the reading, I drove to Maple Ridge. I know that probably sounds strange. Leland was gone. There was no one to meet on that garden bench, no coffee to bring, no 2-hour conversation to have in the cold quiet of a Wednesday morning. But I needed to go anyway. I sat on the bench alone for about 20 minutes. The Japanese maple was bare, its branches making clean, careful lines against the gray December sky. The garden was empty, the facility was warm and lit behind me, and somewhere inside, other families were navigating their own versions of whatever this was. Love and loss and the complicated arithmetic of what people leave behind. I thought about what Leland had said on one of our early Wednesday mornings when I had asked him how he managed the weight of knowing things that other people didn't know, the loneliness of keeping things to yourself for years at a time. He had looked at me for a moment in that way he had. You're not keeping things from people, he said. You're keeping things for people, for the right time, for the right use. That's not loneliness. That's stewardship. I had written that down when I got home. I still have it. I sat on the bench until the cold became serious, and then I stood up, straightened my coat, and walked back to my car. Tomorrow was Wednesday. The 30 days between Leland's death and the will reading were not experienced equally by everyone involved. For Sloane, I learned later through various corroborating accounts, those 30 days were a period of confident expansion. She operated on the assumption, reasonable given what she believed she knew, that the reading would be a formality, a public confirmation of an outcome she had already privately secured. She had lunch with two of Crawford Property Group's major commercial tenants, both men in their 60s who had worked with Leland for decades and who she addressed with the particular combination of warmth and authority of someone who expects to be in charge soon and wants to establish that expectation early. Both men were polite. Neither committed to anything. She asked Stuart to sign a document she described as a family consensus agreement, a statement of shared intention regarding the future management of Crawford Property Group, pending the formal transfer of the estate. Stuart had sat with it for 2 days and then signed it, with the particular defeated compliance of a man who has spent his whole life signing things he wasn't sure about because not signing felt like a different kind of confrontation. When I found out about this, Harriet mentioned it, matter-of-factly, over tea, I called Nora. It has no legal weight, Nora said immediately. It's not a binding document. It has no bearing on the will or on any legal process. If Sloan tries to present it as evidence of family agreement, we can address it in 30 seconds. A brief pause. But it's useful information. Why? Because it tells you what she thinks she needs. She's building a paper trail of consensus because she's not completely certain the will says what she thinks it says. She's hedging. Nora's voice was measured. She's about 90% confident. The other 10% is why she's doing all of this. She should be 100% uncertain, I said. She will be, Nora said, on Wednesday. Meanwhile, and this is the part that I think about when I think about those 30 days, Stuart called me 3 more times. Not to report on Sloan's activities, not to ask me to sign anything or agree to anything or participate in any of the arrangements that were being made around me in the assumption of my absence. He called each time from his cell phone at odd hours with the halting quality of someone reaching for a conversation they don't know how to have. The second call? He asked me how I was doing. I told him I was managing. He said he was glad. There was a silence. Then, "Your grandfather always spoke well of you. I want you to know that." I said thank you. He said goodbye. The third call. He asked whether I had spoken to Harriet recently. I said yes, I was with her most days. He said that was good, that he was glad she wasn't alone. Another silence. I should have been more present. With her. With you. He stopped. I waited. "I'm not good at this," he said finally. "I never have been." "I know," I said. "It's okay." "It isn't," he said. "But I appreciate you saying so." The fourth call came 2 days before the reading. I have described it already in the outline of this story. Stuart's voice, older than I remembered, carrying the specific weight of someone who has been holding something too long and finally needs to set it down. He told me that Leland had said something to him before he died. "Stuart, you know what you owe Arden. Don't let fear make you silent one more time." "I've been silent too long," Stuart said. "I don't know how to fix it, but I don't want to sign anything else. I don't want to make anything harder for you." "You don't have to do anything," I said. "Just come on Wednesday and sit still." "That I can do," he said. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I believed my father completely. I had spent most of my life categorizing Stuart as a passive figure, not cruel, not malicious, simply absent in all the ways that mattered. And that categorization was not wrong, exactly. But in those last 4 calls before the reading, I began to understand something that I had been too close to see clearly. Stuart's silence had not been indifference. It had been the specific, paralyzing silence of a man who had made a compromise at 26 years old, accepting, for the sake of his marriage and his standing and his father's approval, a situation he knew was wrong, and had then spent 35 years unable to either fully commit to the compromise or fully walk away from it. He had not been absent from my life because he didn't care. He had been absent because caring required him to confront what he had agreed to, and confronting it meant admitting that the life he had built was constructed on a foundation that he had never felt fully clean about. That is not a defense of him. It is simply a more accurate account of him. And accuracy matters even when, especially when, it complicates the story. I did not need Stuart to be the father he should have been. It was too late for that, and I was 35 years old, and I had built a life that did not require him to fill that role retroactively. But I needed him to be honest on Wednesday, in the way that he had been honest on the phone 4 times in 30 days. That was enough. That was what I needed from him. That was what I got. The night before the reading, after I returned from Maple Ridge, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I had laid out what I was going to wear, a deep navy suit, well cut, that I had bought 2 years earlier and worn twice. Simple, precise, not performative. Myself, in the language of clothes. I thought about what Nora had said. Wear something that makes you feel like exactly who you are. I thought about who I was. I was the granddaughter of a man who had taught me that patience is not the same as passivity, that watching is not the same as waiting, that the most powerful position in any room is the one that no one is watching. I was the daughter, by choice, by love, by the deliberate decision of someone who had full information and chose anyway, of a man who had spent the last 2 years of his life building something that would outlast him and protect the person he had chosen to protect. I was a woman who had spent 16 years being invisible by design and who was about to walk into a room and be, for the first time in her adult life, completely visible. I thought about Sloane, across town, probably sleeping soundly in the confidence of someone who has never seriously considered the possibility that she might be wrong. I thought about Patrice, who had written "Forgive me" on the back of a photograph and hidden it in a closet and lived with that unanswered request for 35 years. I thought about Harriet, who had walked into a university cafeteria with 2 cups of coffee and told a 19-year-old girl the truth because she believed that the truth, given with love and at the right time, was the most important gift one person could give another. I thought about Owen Hartley, whose name I had known for 16 years and whose face I had found in an old photograph and who existed somewhere in the world without knowing what this week held. And I thought about the Wednesday mornings, the Japanese maple, the coffee, the 2 hours in the cold garden with the only person who had ever looked at me with complete recognition, not as a problem to be managed, not as a background detail in someone else's story, but as exactly, specifically, irreplaceably myself. You were not invisible, he had written. I saw you. I have always seen you. I folded that thought carefully and placed it where I could reach it. Tomorrow, I would need it. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. Outside, Portland rain moved quietly against the windows, and the city went about its ordinary business. And somewhere in a fireproof cabinet in a law office downtown, a sealed folder held a document that would, in the morning, change the order of things. Leland Crawford had built something that would still be standing. I intended to make sure it stood. Wednesday morning arrived the way that consequential mornings often do. Quietly, without announcement, indistinguishable from any other morning until you were already inside it. I was awake before my alarm. I lay still for a few minutes in the gray pre-dawn light, listening to the city beginning its day outside my window. The first buses, a dog somewhere down the street, the particular silence of a winter morning that hasn't yet decided what kind of day it intends to be. I showered, made coffee, and stood at my kitchen window while I drank it. The street below was wet from overnight rain, the pavement dark and reflective, the bare trees along the sidewalk making patient, intricate patterns against a sky the color of old pewter. I thought about nothing in particular. This was deliberate. Leland had told me once that the hour before a significant meeting should be spent in genuine quiet rather than rehearsal. Everything you need to know, you already know, he said. Rehearsing it again only introduces doubt about whether you know it well enough. You do. Trust the preparation. I trusted the preparation. At 7:30, I dressed, the navy suit, a cream silk blouse, low heels in dark leather. Simple, precise, nothing borrowed from anyone else's idea of what the moment required. I stood in front of the mirror for exactly as long as it took to confirm that I looked like myself. Then I picked up my bag, picked up my keys, and walked out. Nora met me in the lobby of the building at 8:45. She was already there when I arrived, standing near the elevator with her black briefcase and the particular composed alertness that I had come to recognize as her version of readiness. She looked at me once, briefly, and gave a small nod. "How are you?" she asked. "Clear," I said. She nodded again, as though this was exactly the right answer, which I suppose it was. We took the elevator to the top floor. The offices of Whitfield and Associates occupied the full 14th floor of a downtown Portland building. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides, dark wood paneling, the kind of carpeting that absorbed sound so completely that you became aware of your own heartbeat in the silence. The receptionist, a composed young woman named Melissa who had worked for Raymond Whitfield for 12 years and who had seen, I imagined, many versions of this kind of morning, greeted us by name and led us down the corridor to the main conference room. Raymond Whitfield was already inside, standing at the window with a cup of coffee, looking out over the city. He turned when we entered. He was 70 years old, silver-haired, and dressed in a dark suit with the careful formality of a man who understood that the clothes you wear when you deliver important news are part of the message. "Arden," he said. He shook my hand with both of his, briefly, warmly. Your grandfather asked me to tell you something this morning. He left a note for me to read to you before the others arrived. I hadn't known about this. I stood still. Raymond reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a small, folded piece of paper. He wrote this about 6 months ago, Raymond said. He said, read it to her before she walks into the room so she carries it with her. He unfolded it and read, Arden, by the time you hear this, you will have already done everything you needed to do. You showed up, you were patient, you were honest. You did not let them make you small, even when you let them think you were. That is the hardest thing, and you did it without losing yourself. Walk in there today knowing that I am not leaving you a burden. I am leaving you a beginning. Do something worthy of it. I know you will. Leland. The room was very quiet. I took one slow breath, then another. Thank you, I said. Raymond folded the note and held it out to me. I took it and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket against my ribs where I could feel it. Ready? Nora said quietly beside me. Yes, I said. Harriet arrived first at 5 minutes to 9. She came in on the arm of her aide, a kind and capable woman named Beverly, who had been with her for 3 years, and she released Beverly's arm as soon as she was through the door and walked to the chair at the left end of the conference table under her own power. She was wearing blue, a deep, clear blue that she had always worn well, and her hair was pinned back simply, and she looked as she sat down and arranged her hands in her lap and looked around the room with those clear, comprehensive eyes, exactly like what she was, the woman who had started all of this, in a university cafeteria with 2 cups of coffee and the courage to tell the truth. She looked at me across the table and something passed between us that didn't require words. Stuart arrived at 2 minutes to 9. He came alone, no Patrice, which I had not expected, and which told me something important about what the last 30 days had cost him and what he had decided to do with that cost. He was wearing a dark gray suit that hung slightly loose on him as though he had lost weight recently, which I thought he probably had. He looked older than the last time I had seen him in person. He looked, in a way I hadn't seen before, like a man who had put something down that he had been carrying for a very long time, and was not yet sure how to walk without the weight. He chose the chair by the window as I had placed him in my imagination. He did not look at me immediately. He looked at his hands. Then he looked up, across the table, and found me, and I gave him a small nod. He exhaled, nodded back. Then the door opened again. Patrice came in first, wearing black and moving with the particular precision of a woman who has done her makeup and her posture and her expression very carefully this morning, who has prepared a face for this day and intends to wear it. Behind her came Sloane. I want to describe how Sloane looked because it matters for understanding what happened next. She was wearing a cream-colored suit, well cut, expensive, clearly selected for this occasion. Her hair was up. Her makeup was more formal than usual, harder around the edges, as though she had decided that today required armor rather than warmth. She carried her own briefcase, new, structured leather, and beside her walked Theodore Granger, her attorney, a tall man in his mid-50s whose face appeared on 3 separate billboards on the route from my apartment to this office, advertising aggressive representation in estate and probate disputes. Sloane looked around the room when she entered with the quick, cataloging gaze of someone confirming that the landscape matches the map they've been using. She saw Raymond, she saw Nora, she saw Stuart and Harriet and Patrice already moving to a chair. Then she saw me. I was standing at the right end of the table, one hand resting lightly on the back of the chair at the head of that end, the chair she would have naturally moved toward if the room had unfolded the way she expected it to. Her gaze moved from my face to the chair and back. Grace, she said, and then stopped because she had used the wrong name, the name from some internal script she'd been running so long it had overwritten the actual one, and she corrected herself. Arden. She said it with an effort to recover the warmth, the slight condescension, the greeting she had been planning. I didn't know you'd be bringing... She glanced at Nora. This is Nora Ashby, I said. She'll be representing my interests today. Sloane's eyes moved to Nora. Theodore Granger looked at Nora with the specific assessing attention of one litigator clocking another. Nora looked back at him with complete pleasant equanimity. I see, Sloane said. She recovered quickly. I had to give her that. She settled into a chair mid-table and pulled Theodore down beside her, opening her briefcase with the practiced efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this gesture. She believed she was prepared. She believed she was, in every meaningful sense, already the winner of whatever this morning was. The door opened one final time. Raymond Whitfield entered with 2 folders, one thick, one considerably thicker, and moved to the head of the table with the deliberate, measured pace of a man who has presided over many rooms like this one, and who has learned that the speed at which you move through a consequential space either calms the people in it or frightens them, and that calm is almost always more useful. He set both folders on the table. He looked at each person in the room in turn: Harriet, Stuart, Patrice, Theodore, Sloane, then me. He gave me the same small nod he had given me in the corridor, the one that meant we are ready, and he sat down. "Thank you all for being here," he said. "Before we begin, I want to note that Mr. Crawford left specific instructions for the conduct of this reading, which I will follow precisely. I ask that everyone hold questions and responses until I have read the document in full. There will be time for discussion afterward." He looked at Theodore Granger. "This applies to legal counsel as well. Any objections should be held until the reading is complete." Theodore gave a brief, professional nod. Sloane's hand rested on the table beside her briefcase, perfectly still. Raymond opened the first folder. "I, Leland James Crawford, being of sound mind and full legal capacity, do hereby declare this document to be my final will and testament, executed on the 14th day of April, superseding all prior versions and codicils." Sloane's hand on the table moved. A slight shift, a micro-adjustment. The 14th of April. That was 8 months ago. That was not the document she had read. Raymond continued. "To my wife, Harriet Louise Crawford, I leave full and unencumbered ownership of the residence at Hartwell Drive, together with all personal property contained therein, for the duration of her natural life. Upon her death, the property shall transfer as specified in the supplemental trust documentation held by this office." Harriet's expression did not change. She had known this already. She folded her hands more precisely in her lap. "To my son, Stuart James Crawford, I leave a 20% share of Crawford Property Group, together with a cash distribution of $400,000 from the estate's liquid holdings, in recognition of his 30 years of service and his role in building what the company became." Stuart looked up. His expression was complicated. Relief and something older than relief, something like being seen in a way you had stopped expecting. Raymond turned a page. "To my granddaughter, Arden Crawford, I leave 65% of Crawford Property Group, including full operational authority and voting rights, together with all remaining investment accounts, commercial lease agreements, and associated assets, totaling in current valuation approximately $26 million. The room went still in the way that rooms go still when something irrevocable has been said out loud. Sloane's stillness lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then, "She is not his granddaughter." Her voice was controlled, but only just. The control was the audible effort, the strain of someone holding a structure together by force. "We have documented proof of a non-biological relationship. This will canon Miss Crawford." Raymond's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "I ask that responses be held until the reading is complete. There is more." Theodore Granger put his hand briefly on Sloane's arm. She sat back. Raymond turned to the next page. "I have known since Arden was 2 years old that she is not my biological granddaughter. I made this discovery through means I will not detail here, as they are irrelevant to my decision. What is relevant is the decision itself. I chose, with complete information and of my own free will, to raise Arden as my granddaughter. I chose to love her as my granddaughter, and I choose now, with the same completeness of information and the same freedom of will, to leave her the legacy I have spent 50 years building." He turned another page. "This choice requires no biological justification. It requires no external validation. It is made because in 50 years of watching people, in business, in family, in the long and frequently disappointing education of understanding what people actually are rather than what they present themselves to be, Arden is the only person in my family who has demonstrated consistently and without performance the qualities that this legacy requires: integrity, patience, the willingness to understand something fully before acting on it, and the rare quality of knowing what a thing is actually for." Patrice made a sound. Barely a sound, just an exhaling, as though something she had been holding for a very long time had finally released. Raymond placed both hands flat on the table. "I am now going to open the second folder," he said. Mr. Crawford anticipated that his decision would be challenged on the grounds of Arden's biological status. He therefore commissioned an independent investigation, conducted over a period of 2 years, to document any activities relating to the management or attempted manipulation of his estate. The findings of this investigation are part of the official estate record and have been submitted to this office as supporting documentation. He opened the second folder and placed it on the table so that its contents were visible. The record includes, Raymond said, meeting logs from 11 consultations between between Sloane Crawford and 3 separate estate law firms, all conducted within the 18 months preceding Mr. Crawford's death, without the knowledge or authorization of the estate holder. Theodore Granger straightened almost imperceptibly in his chair. It includes financial records tracing $340,000 in transfers from Crawford estate accounts to Sloane Crawford's personal accounts over a period of 5 years, none of which are documented as gifts in the estate's financial records. Sloane's face was changing. The careful armor of the morning, the composed certainty she had walked in wearing, was losing its structure in the specific way of something that was always a performance rather than a reality. Not crumbling dramatically, just becoming visible as what it was. It includes a recorded telephone conversation between Patrice Crawford and Sloane Crawford, dated approximately 2 months before Mr. Crawford's death, in which the disposition of estate assets is discussed in terms that the estate's legal counsel considers relevant to the question of undue influence. Patrice turned to look at Sloane. Sloane did not look back. And it includes, Raymond said, and here his voice carried the specific quietness of someone delivering the thing that everything else has been building toward, a purchase record for 1 DNA testing kit, ordered from an online retailer and delivered to Sloane Crawford's home address, 6 weeks prior to Arden Crawford's 35th birthday dinner. The room was absolutely silent. Raymond looked up from the folder. Mr. Crawford's note regarding this last item reads as follows, and I will quote directly. The test that was given as a weapon became the final piece of a record that makes my decision unassailable. I could not have designed it better myself. I did not need to. Sloane stood up. It was not a controlled movement. It was the movement of someone whose internal structure has failed and whose body is operating on something older and less reasoned than strategy. She stopped, tried again. She manipulated him. She was meeting with him without our knowledge. She was, Miss Crawford. Raymond's voice was patient and immovable. The will contains a no contest provision. Any legal challenge to its terms will result in the automatic forfeiture of any inheritance specified herein, and the reclassification of all undocumented transfers as personal debt, recoverable by the estate within 12 months. Theodore Granger stood, placed his hand on Sloane's arm, and said something quietly into her ear. She turned to look at him. He shook his head once, firmly. She sat down. The room breathed. Raymond looked at me. Mr. Crawford left a personal letter to be read aloud at this time, he said, to Arden. He asked me to read it here, in this room, in front of the family. He reached into the first folder and removed a single sheet of paper, handwritten, in the careful, slightly slowed script of someone writing with deliberate attention, making sure every word lands where it is meant to land. Raymond read, Arden, you spent the first 35 years of your life in a family that did not fully see you. I want to be honest about my part in that. I watched when I should have acted. I preserved a structure that protected other people at your expense. I told myself that the way I expressed my love, in preparation, in the foundation I was building for you, was enough. I am not certain it was. I am certain only that it was what I knew how to do, and that I did it with everything I had. You are not my granddaughter because you share my blood. You are my granddaughter because you are the person I most recognize. The patience, the precision, the refusal to be small even when you allowed people to think you were. Those are mine. I see them in you the way I see my own handwriting, not identical, but from the same hand. The company I am leaving you is not a gift. It is a responsibility. I know you know the difference. That is, in the end, the whole reason. I am proud of you. I have always been proud of you. I should have said it out loud more often, and in rooms where other people could hear it. I am saying it now. Take care of your grandmother. Take care of what I built, and take care of yourself, which is the one I suspect you are least practiced at, and the one I most want for you. With all my love, Leland. I will not pretend that I held myself together through the reading of that letter. I did not cry loudly or dramatically. I did not perform grief, but my eyes filled and something in my chest opened in the specific way of something that has been carefully sealed for a very long time and has finally, legitimately, been given permission to open. I felt Nora's hand briefly on my arm beside me, not comforting exactly, just present, acknowledging. I looked up when Raymond finished. Harriet was looking at me from the other end of the table with eyes that were bright and steady. She nodded once, with the particular quality of someone who has been waiting for a long time to see a specific thing be given to a specific person and who is satisfied, finally, that it has been. Stuart had his face turned toward the window. I could see his profile. His jaw was working. He was not crying, but he was close to it, and the proximity to tears seemed to be costing him something significant. Patrice was looking at the table. Her hands were folded in her lap, pressed together tightly, and she looked like a woman who is sitting inside a very small, very contained space that she has made from what remains of herself. And Sloane. Sloane was looking at me. I looked back. There was no triumph in what I felt in that moment. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy to write this as a moment of pure vindication, of the satisfying click of justice arriving on schedule. But the feeling was more complicated than that. She was my sister. She had done real harm. To me, to my grandfather, to Stuart in ways he was still untangling. She had spent years building a strategy to remove me from a family I had spent years learning to stop needing. And looking at her now, I saw what I had always been too close to clearly see, that everything she had done had come from a kind of fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear that the love in that house had always been finite and that my presence reduced her share of it. Fear that was not my fault and that I could not have fixed, but that had shaped every interaction between us since we were small. I did not forgive her in that moment. Forgiveness is not a moment. It is a long and private process that happens slowly and without audience, but I did not hate her either. I looked at her with the clear eyes of someone who is finally, fully standing in their own place, and I said the truest thing I had. I didn't plan this, Sloane. He did, because he knew you, and he knew me, and he knew the difference. She looked at me for a long moment. Her chin moved, just slightly, just once. Then she looked away. Theodore Granger withdrew from the case the following morning. He called Sloane's cell phone at 8:15, spoke to her for 11 minutes, and then sent a formal letter to Raymond Whitfield's office declining to represent a challenge to the Crawford estate. His stated reason was a conflict of interest. His actual reason, I suspected, was the calculation of any experienced attorney looking at the evidence. Some cases are not winnable, and the ones that are not winnable are worth withdrawing from quickly and cleanly before the loss attaches to your name. Sloane retained a second attorney 4 days later. He reviewed the documentation, consulted with a colleague who specialized in Oregon probate law, and called Sloane to advise against any challenge. She retained a third attorney. He reached the same conclusion in less time. On the 10th day after the reading, Sloane's third attorney contacted Nora Ashby's office to discuss the terms of a resolution. We met, Nora and I, Sloane and her attorney, in a conference room at Nora's office, not Raymond's. Neutral ground, or as close to it as this particular situation could produce. Sloane came without Patrice. She sat across from me for the first time since the reading, and she looked like someone who had spent 10 days traveling a very long distance and had arrived somewhere she had not intended to be. I had thought carefully about what I wanted to offer, not what I could demand. I understood what I could demand. I had thought about what was proportionate, what was honest, and what was consistent with the person Leland had said he recognized in me. I spoke directly to Sloane, not through the attorneys. "I'm not here to take everything from you," I said. "I'm here to be accurate. Those are different things." And she looked at me. "The $340,000, I said. "The estate's position is that it's undocumented and recoverable. I'm willing to structure it as a formal loan rather than an immediate demand. 5-year term, low interest, monthly payments that are manageable based on your current income. That is better than the legal alternative." Her attorney looked at the figure Nora had prepared and gave a small, confirming nod. "Your share of Crawford Property Group," I continued. "The will specifies 10%. That stands. You have no operational authority, but you have an ownership stake, and you have the right to sell that stake to me at fair market value at any time you choose. I will not force a buyout. That is your decision on your timeline." Sloane's jaw was tight, but she was listening. The house on Hartwell Drive belongs to Harriet for her lifetime, I said. That is not negotiable, and I wouldn't make it negotiable even if I could. When her time comes, the estate will handle the transfer as Leland specified. I paused. What I want in return, I said, is straightforward. I want accurate records. I want the family financial history documented correctly. What was a loan? What was a gift? What belongs to whom? I want no further attempts to access, influence, or interfere with the operation of Crawford Property Group. I looked at her steadily. And I want you to stop. She looked up. Stop what? The story you've been telling yourself, I said. The one where I'm the interloper and you're the legitimate heir and everything that happened to you is something I did to you. I kept my voice even. I didn't do anything to you, Sloane. I spent 16 years being invisible so that you would never feel threatened by me. That was probably a mistake. It let the resentment build without any friction, without any honest conversation that might have changed things. I paused. I'm not angry about it. I'm just telling you, the story isn't true, and building your life on a story that isn't true is going to keep costing you. The room was quiet. Sloane's attorney looked at Sloane. Sloane looked at the table. Then she said very quietly, Why are you being... She stopped, tried again. You don't have to be fair. You won. I'm not being fair because I won, I said. I'm being fair because it's the right way to conduct yourself when you have the power to be unfair. Leland taught me that. The measure of what you do with an estate isn't what you receive. It's what you do with what you receive. A long pause. I'll sign, Sloane said. She said it the way people say things they have thought about for 10 days and arrived at with a combination of exhaustion and something resembling relief. I'll sign the agreement. Her attorney began organizing the papers. I looked at my sister across the table. This woman I had grown up beside and never quite grown up with. This person who had handed me a gift wrapped in silver paper and called it a weapon and set in motion everything that followed. And I felt the complicated arithmetic of what family actually is. Not the people you would choose, but the people you are given, and the question of what you make of that giving. I did not have an answer to that question yet. I suspected I would be working on it for a long time. That seemed about right. 3 days after the settlement agreement was signed, Nora called me. There's something else, she said. I've been holding it until the legal matters were resolved because I wanted you to receive it without the noise of everything else around it. A brief pause. Owen Hartley contacted Raymond Whitfield's office approximately 3 weeks before the reading. He had seen the public notice of Leland Crawford's death in the Oregon obituaries. He doesn't know the details of the will or the estate. He reached out, carefully, through Raymond, to ask whether it would be appropriate to send a letter. I sat very still. Raymond forwarded the request to me, Nora said. I held it. I didn't think it was my place to introduce it until you were ready. Another pause. The letter is here. I can have it messengered to you today, or you can come and collect it, or I can hold it indefinitely if you're not ready. All of those options are equally fine. I'll come today, I said. I drove to Nora's office that afternoon. She handed me a plain white envelope sealed, with my name written on the front in unfamiliar handwriting. Careful, slightly formal, the handwriting of someone who had thought about every letter of the name they were writing. I took it home and sat with it on the kitchen table for an hour before I opened it. The letter was 3 paragraphs long. I will not reproduce it in full because some things are not meant to be public, and this is one of them. But I will tell you what it said in the honest summary that Leland would have approved of. He said he had known about me for 12 years. A mutual friend had mentioned, in passing, without any particular weight, that Patrice Crawford had a daughter named Arden who worked in finance in Portland. He had not pursued it. He had understood years earlier that the decision made when I was born was not his to revisit unilaterally. But he had known, and he had wondered, and he had, in the way that people carry things they cannot act on, carried me with him in the particular, wordless way of someone who has a question they are not permitted to ask. He said he was not writing to claim anything, not a relationship, not a role, not anything I had not already built for myself without his help. He understood that I had a grandfather who had loved me and a life that was entirely my own construction. He was not asking to be inserted into that. He was writing, he said, because he wanted me to know one thing, and he wanted me to know it from him directly, in his own words, rather than from a record or a document or someone else's account. I knew about you. I always wondered who you were becoming, and if the person you have become is reflected even partially in what brought you to this moment, then I am glad, with a gladness I have no right to claim but cannot help feeling, that you exist." He closed by saying that he would not contact me again unless I reached out first, and that he understood if I never did, and that either way he wished me well. I sat with the letter for a long time. Then I called Harriet. She answered on the second ring, the way she always did, because Harriet Crawford had never been a person who let a phone ring while she was sitting next to it. "I got a letter," I said. "I know," she said, not unkindly. "Are you all right?" I thought about it, really thought about it, in the honest way Leland had taught me. "Yes," I said. "I think I am. I paused. I feel like someone handed me a piece of a map I didn't know was missing. Not the whole map, just one piece. But the map makes more sense with it than without it." Harriet was quiet for a moment. "You had 2 men who loved you," she said. "One from the beginning, one from a distance. Most people get less than that." A pause. "What are you going to do with the letter?" "I'm going to keep it," I said. "I'm going to think about it for a long time, and someday when I understand what I want to say, I might write back." "That sounds like you," Harriet said. "It sounds like him too," I said. "The one who raised me." "Yes," she said quietly. "It does." Stuart came to see me 2 weeks after the settlement. He drove to Portland from the West Hills on a Saturday morning, called from the parking garage downstairs rather than announcing himself in advance, and stood in my apartment looking at the bookshelves along the walls with the expression of someone seeing a room that tells them something they should have already known. "You have his books," he said. He was looking at the second shelf, a row of titles on commercial real estate, corporate structure, the history of Oregon land use law. Several of them had Leland's name written inside the front cover, transferred to me over years of Wednesday mornings. "He gave them to me over the years," I said, 1 or 2 at a time. Stuart looked at the shelf for a long moment. Then he turned and sat down on the couch, and he looked at his hands and he said, "I need to tell you something. I should have said it a long time ago, and I didn't, and I understand if that's not fixable, but I need to say it now." "Okay," I said. I sat down across from him. "I knew," he said, "about the Wednesday mornings, about your grandfather meeting with you. I'd known for about 3 years." He looked up. He told me. He said, "Stuart, I'm meeting with Arden once a month and I'm telling her the truth about a number of things, and I think you should know that." I asked him why he was telling me. He said, "Because you deserve to know and because someday she's going to need you to have known and not pretended you didn't." I was very still. "I didn't tell Patrice," Stuart said. "I didn't tell Sloan. I just sat with it. For 3 years, knowing what he was doing, knowing what it probably meant for how things would turn out, and not..." He stopped. "I kept telling myself I'd talk to you, that I'd find the right moment to..." He shook his head. "There isn't a right moment. There's just the moment you decide to stop waiting for the right one." "Why are you telling me now?" I asked. "Because you told Sloan the truth in that room," he said. "You told her the story she'd been telling herself wasn't true, and I have a version of that same problem." He looked at me. "I have spent 35 years telling myself that being present in the house was the same as being present for you. It wasn't. I knew it wasn't. I was afraid of what admitting it would cost me." He paused. "It cost me more to avoid it." The room was quiet. Outside, Portland was doing something rare and lovely. Actual winter sunlight, the kind that only lasts a few hours and makes the whole wet city golden and briefly unfamiliar. "I don't need you to have been a different father," I said finally. "I needed you to be honest, and you're being honest now, and I'm glad. I'm genuinely glad." I paused. "I don't know what this is going forward. I don't know what we are to each other now that all the pretending is done. But I'm willing to find out if you are." As Stuart looked at me for a long moment, he looked, in that moment, like a man who has put down something very heavy and is not yet sure whether his hands remember how to be empty. "I am," he said. "Spring came to Portland the way it always does. Not suddenly, but incrementally. The gray sky lightening by degrees, the bare trees filling in from the tips outward, the wet streets beginning to smell of earth and possibility instead of just cold. I moved into a proper office at Crawford Property Group in late March. Not Leland's office. I took a smaller one down the hall, with a window that looked north toward the hills. Leland's office I left as it was for the first 3 months, because some spaces need time before they're ready to become something new. I brought in a consultant, a woman named Patricia Reeves, who had restructured 2 other Portland commercial real estate companies in the past decade. And together we spent April and May going through the portfolio, property by property, lease by lease, understanding exactly what Leland had built and where it needed attention. There was more that needed attention than I had expected, and it was more interesting work than I had anticipated, and I found in the day-to-day detail of it something I had not expected to find: satisfaction. Not the satisfaction of having won something, but the satisfaction of doing something that needed doing and doing it well, and doing it in a way that honored what it was built from. Patrice came to see me in April. She drove herself, which was notable. Patrice had always had Stuart or someone else drive her to anything that required navigating downtown. She sat in the chair across from my desk and put her hands in her lap and said, without the preamble I had expected, "I want to tell you about Owen Hartley." I let her. She spoke for 40 minutes. She was honest in the way that people are honest when they have finally decided that the cost of honesty is lower than the cost of continuing to carry the weight of what they haven't said. She told me about the relationship, about the timing, about the decision she and Stuart and Leland had made together in the kitchen of the Hartwell Drive house on a November evening 35 years ago. She told me about the guilt she had carried, about the ways it had expressed itself in her behavior toward me. Behavior she named specifically and accurately, without softening it into accident or ignorance. She did not ask me to forgive her. She had learned, I think, from the reading, from my words to Sloane, which she had heard, that was not what I needed from her. "I believe you," I said when she finished. "I believe that you're telling me the truth, and I think—" I paused, choosing carefully. "I think that what I need from you, going forward, is not for you to make up for what happened. I think it's just to be honest, with yourself, with me, with whatever comes next." I looked at her. "That's all. I don't need more than that." She nodded. She looked, for the first time in my memory, simply tired, not performing tiredness, not weaponizing fragility, just genuinely, quietly tired in the way of someone who has been holding themselves at a particular angle for 35 years and has finally allowed themselves to sit straight. "All right," she said. She stood. She picked up her bag. At the door she paused, and for a moment I thought she was going to say something that would undo the cleanness of what we'd just established. But she only said, "He was right about you, your grandfather." She didn't look at me when she said it. He was right. Then she left. Harriet and I continued our Wednesday mornings. We moved them from Maple Ridge. There was no longer a reason to go there, to the kitchen table at Hartwell Drive, which was where they probably should have been all along. I brought coffee from the shop on Burnside. She made whatever she felt like making. Sometimes pound cake, sometimes nothing, sometimes the specific biscuits that she had been making since 1969 and that I had been trying to learn to replicate since I was old enough to stand at a kitchen counter. We talked about the business, about the properties, about the tenants who were giving trouble and the ones who were a pleasure, and the long, complicated question of what to do with a particular warehouse on the east side that Leland had been holding for 20 years, waiting for the right development moment. We talked about the garden and what to do with it in spring. We talked about books we were reading. We did not talk about Leland very much directly. He was present in everything. In the way we structured the conversations, in the questions we asked, in the standard we implicitly held ourselves to. Some people, when they leave, take up more room than they occupied when they were alive. Leland was like that. On a Wednesday morning in April, when the Japanese maple in the garden was beginning to come back in that particular clear, specific green of early spring, Harriet looked at me across the coffee cups and said, "Are you happy?" I sat with the question. I gave it the honest attention it deserved. "I'm oriented," I said finally. "I know where I am. I know what I'm doing. I know why." I paused. "I think that's the foundation of happy. I think the rest of it is built on that, and I'm building." Harriet considered this. "That's a better answer than most people give," she said. "I had good teachers," I said. She picked up her coffee cup. Outside, the maple moved in a light spring wind, the new leaves catching the morning light the way that new things catch light. with a freshness that is entirely itself, not borrowed from anything that came before. "He would have loved to see this," Harriet said quietly, not sadly, just honestly. "I know," I said. "I think he planned for it. I think this is exactly what he meant to see." She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I think you're right." Sloan and I did not speak for 7 months. The first time she contacted me was in October on a quiet Tuesday evening when I was finishing a quarterly report at my desk and my phone showed her name on the screen with the slight surprise of something you had expected at some point but had stopped actively anticipating. She texted, 4 lines. "I've been thinking about what you said in that room, about the story I was telling myself. I don't know if you're right. I think you might be. I'm not ready to talk about it yet, but I wanted you to know I've been thinking about it." I read it twice. Then I replied, "I'm here when you're ready. No timeline." She didn't reply, but she read it within 30 seconds and the read receipt was enough. Some things take the time they take. I had learned that better than almost anyone. That autumn, I found a small frame photograph in a box of things from Leland's desk that Beverly had quietly packed and set aside for me. It was a photograph I had never seen. Leland at perhaps 60, standing in the garden at Hartwell Drive, and beside him at about 6 years old, a child with serious eyes and a slight frown of concentration, looking at something just outside the frame. Me, looking at something just outside the frame with the expression of someone who is paying very careful attention. Leland's hand was on my shoulder. He was not looking at the camera. He was looking at me. I put the photograph on my desk next to the window that faces north, where the morning light hits it between 9 and 11 and makes it glow with the particular warmth of things that have waited a long time to be seen. Every morning when I sit down at my desk, it is the first thing I see. They spent years looking past me. I use that time well. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of the story. If it moved you, if any part of it felt true or familiar or like something you needed to hear, please share it with someone who might need it too. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, I would be so grateful if you would. Every subscriber means this story travels a little further, reaches someone else who might be sitting quietly in a room somewhere, being looked past, doing the work, waiting for their Wednesday morning. I'll see you in the next one.